The night they lit up the resort for the first time, my name was on none of the invitations. I parked on the shoulder of the county road and watched the fountains come on from half a mile away, white water climbing into a black desert sky, and I thought about how much of that water they did not own. There was a banner over the gate with a name that used to be my family's, spelled the way a marketing team spells things. Valet Lights. A string quartet I could not hear. My cousin stood at the center of it in a suit that cost more than my truck, shaking hands with the men who had just taken 400 acres from me. My name is Wes. The man cutting the ribbon was my cousin Dale. And this is the story of how I let him take the whole ranch, smiled while he did it, and waited 14 months for him to turn on a tap and find out he had built a palace he could not fill with water. The land came down from my great-grandmother. Her name was Opal, and she held that ranch through the Dust Bowl when the sky turned brown and the topsoil left the county on the wind, and half the families around her walked away from deeds that were not worth the paper. Opal did not walk. She used to tell me that everyone who left had made the same mistake. They thought they owned land. Nobody owns land out here, Wes, she said. The bank owns the note and the sky owns the rain. All you can really keep is the water, if you are smart enough to hold on to it. I was 7. I thought it was just something old women said while they watched the horizon for clouds. I had no idea it was the only reason I would survive what my own blood did to me, because Opal did something in 1934 that nobody in my family ever quite understood. She went to the county seat, and she paid a lawyer she could not afford, and she split the ranch into 2 things on paper. There was the surface, the dirt, the grazing, the buildings, 400 acres of high desert. And then there was a second deed, small and strange, that everybody in the family treated like a keepsake. It covered the well, the spring on the north line, and the right to every drop of water in the ground under the whole property. She severed the water from the land. She put that second deed in a separate chain of title, and she passed it down by itself, hand to hand, name to name, until it reached me. Land in one hand, water in the other. For 90 years, nobody thought it mattered. The rain always came eventually. The well always ran. Why would you ever need to think about who owned the water when the water was just there? My cousin Dale could sell anything. He came back from the city with a haircut and a handshake and a way of making you feel like the smartest man in the room while he took your wallet. When the highway got widened and the town 2 exits down started to boom, Dale saw what the ranch could be before the rest of us did. You know, not cattle. A destination. A gated desert resort with a spa and a golf course, and Opal's name arched over the entrance, he said, to honor her. He was family. He held my daughter on his shoulders at the county fair. He ran the family trust that held the surface land, because years ago, when it seemed like a boring job nobody wanted, we had all voted to let him. That vote was the first knife. I just could not see the blade yet. He brought in a developer, a firm called Meridian, the kind with money that moves quietly and lawyers who bill by the breath. They wanted the 400 acres, and they wanted them clean. 1 owner, 1 signature, no complications. Dale controlled the trust, so Dale controlled the dirt. But there was a problem, and for one bright moment, I thought it would save us. Some of the old parcels were still tangled up in individual family names, including mine. So Dale came to me first, the way he always did, with his arm around my shoulder and a rendering on his phone, and he told me we were finally going to make Opal's ranch take care of the whole family for 3 generations. And I did something that made him relax completely. I said yes. Here is the part where you are going to want to yell at me. Signed. I let Dale's lawyer draw every page, and I did not bring my own, and when they slid the documents across that glass table, I put my name on the surface, all 400 acres, my share and the family's, folded into Meridian's clean new company for a number that sounded enormous, in the room and turned out to be a fraction of what the land was worth once it was theirs. I diluted myself. I signed away the dirt my great-grandmother saved in the Dust Bowl, and I did it with a steady hand, and I shook Dale's hand afterward and told him I was proud of him. Everyone at that table thought they had just watched a simple man get talked out of his inheritance. That is exactly what I wanted them to think. Because before I signed a single page about the surface, I had already done the thing Opal taught me. I checked the water. And the water was not on the table. The water was still mine. Their lawyers were thorough about the land. They pulled the surface title back 60 years. They cleared the liens. They mapped every easement across the dirt. But water rights in my state live in their own registry, a separate book most surface buyers never think to open, and Opal's little severed deed had sat quietly in that book for 90 years under a chain of title nobody at Meridian ever pulled. They bought the ranch. They never bought the rain, and the luxury resort in the high desert, the fountains, the golf course greens, the spa, the 200 rooms, the whole shimmering promise of the place, runs on exactly one thing that the desert does not give away for free. So I said nothing. That is the hardest part of a thing like this, and the part most people cannot do. I watched them break ground on my great-grandmother's land. I watched the old cattle pens come down and the framing go up. I drove past on the county road every few weeks like a man visiting a grave, and I said nothing. Dale posted photos of himself in a hard hat. My sister sent me a message asking why I seemed distant, and I told her I was happy for the family, and I meant the first 3 words. For 14 months, Meridian poured roughly $90 million into the ground. Every dollar of it sat on top of a single assumption nobody had checked: that when they finished and they opened the valves, the water would simply come. Because the water was just there. It always had been. The letter came from their engineers, not from me, which is how I knew it was finally time. To fill the fountains and irrigate the greens and run the spa, Meridian needed to drill and pump the water from under the property, and to do that legally, they needed the water rights. So their title company, finally, 90 million too late, opened the second book. And there, in 90-year-old ink, was a severed water deed running in an unbroken chain to one living name. Not the trust. Not Meridian. Not Dale. Me. I got the call on a Tuesday. Dale's voice did not sound charming anymore. It sounded like a man standing in a beautiful empty building, listening to how quiet a fountain is when it has no water in it. They flew me to a boardroom with a view. Meridian's lawyers had done their reading by then, so nobody wasted time pretending I was a simple man anymore. They put a number in front of me to buy the water outright, and it was a large number, and I let it sit on the table the way they had once let their number sit in front of me. Then I slid it back. I did not want to sell them the water, I told them, because you cannot sell a man his own rain and call it a deal. What I owned was not a thing to buy. It was a gate, and a gate is only worth anything if the man holding it decides when it opens. Dale was in that room, in the corner, not at the center for once in his life, and he could not look at me. I looked at him the whole time. So we made a different arrangement, and it was all perfectly legal, which is the only kind of justice I have ever trusted. I did not take the resort. I did not need to. I signed a water lease, my water, to their resort, renewed by me, on my terms, priced as a share of what the place earns every year for as long as it stands. They own a 90 million building. I own the one thing that turns it from a monument into a business. Every time a guest takes a shower or a fountain runs or a sprinkler ticks across the 18th green, a meter turns and a portion of it comes home to Opal's line. Meridian got their resort. They just have to pay my family forever for permission to use it. Dale lost his seat on the deal the day the water came to light because a partner who delivers a resort nobody can operate is not charming, he is a liability, and Meridian cut him the same clean way he once cut me. He calls sometimes. I let it ring. My sister and I are all right, because none of this was ever hers, and Opal's rule was never about revenge anyway. It was about paying attention to the thing everyone else forgets. They all thought they were fighting over land. 400 acres of the most valuable dirt in the county, and the whole time, the only thing that ever mattered was under it. You can buy a man's dirt. You can't buy his rain. So here is what I want to know from you. When they slid that first number across the glass and I signed away the surface with a smile, was I the fool at the table, or the only one who was actually reading? Tell me in the comments. This has been the Vendetta Tapes.